This short video lecture series is continuing our discussion pertaining to water quality. In the previous video lecture, we were talking about water pollution in our coastal environments, and I had displayed a figure depicting the largest oil disasters between 1910 and 2010. The Exxon Valdez oil spill wasn't displayed on that figure, but it's important to note that the Exxon Valdez oil spill of 1989 brought the impact to the environment into everyone's living room based on the news coverage that occurred. People across the world saw the impact on various species being covered by oil as a result of this oil spill. So the oil spill occurred on March 24th, 1989, and about 11 million gallons of crude oil was released into Prince William Sound in Alaska. Many species of animals and plants were impacted by this, as well as critical ecosystems and habitats. This diagram depicts the recovering species and habitats over a timeline. So the incident happened in 1989, and by 1992, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service deemed that the Rocky Intertidal area was considered recovered from a habitat standpoint. Then in 1996, the bald eagle was considered recovered, followed by the river otter, followed by the two types of salmon, pink salmon and sockeye salmon, as well as the common murre, and the list goes on indicating those species that have been recovered. However, there are still some species that are considered to be in a recovering status, and then there's some species and habitats that are considered to not be recovering, and others where they just don't quite know the status of how the oil spill impacted the species. So the herring, the killer whale, and the pigeon guillemots are still not considered fully recovered from this oil spill. And this is a 2010 update that occurred. Now I'd like to switch gears and talk about our waste of plastic and how plastic waste is impacting our ocean environments. You may be familiar with an area that's called the Pacific Garbage Patch. The Pacific Garbage Patch was discovered in 1997 by a California sailor, surfer, volunteer environmentalist. The Pacific Garbage Patch is located west of the United States in the Pacific Ocean, and it's in a convergence zone based on ocean currents in that region. According to Greenpeace, the world makes about 200 billion pounds of plastic products each year, and 10% of it is finding its way into the oceans. 70% of this plastic sinks and damages marine life on the ocean floor. The rest of it ends up in gyres or washing ashore on beaches. It's estimated that 80% of the garbage comes from land, and about 20% is coming from ships that discharge material into the ocean. The average 3,000 passenger cruise ship can expel over 8 tons of waste in a week. Now, I want to be clear that cruise ships are not permitted just to dump garbage like what you see on these beaches into the ocean. That waste is associated with treated wastewater. When the cruise ships go into port, they're required to have their waste removed from the ship directly into the port which they're calling. One of the contributing causes of this Pacific Garbage Patch problem is that the plastic doesn't biodegrade. It can linger for over 16 years. Also, there's 20 times more plastic being used today than what there was 50 years ago. So we've increased our reliance and use on plastic worldwide. In the Pacific Garbage Patch area, they've collected samples and have done analysis comparing the amount of plastic in relationship to the amount of plankton in the ocean water. Please recall that plankton is the basis of the food chain. The research analysis indicates that for every single plankton, there are 6 pieces of plastic. So we have 6 times more small pieces of plastic in the ocean than we do plankton, the basis of the food chain. Well, as you can imagine, the result is that animals are eating the plastic and mistaking it for food. Now, most of the waste and plastic is originating from Japan, China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. They're the ones that are contributing most of the waste. They actually account for 60% of the plastic in the ocean. Keep in mind that it's not just these countries that are contributing, though, however. We here in the U.S. contribute as well. It's just that these 6 are the ones that are contributing the most. Now, the Pacific Garbage Patch location is, like I said, off the coast of California, and it's increasing in size 10 times per year. And it's currently about twice the size of Texas. This top picture on the left side of the screen is a picture of the Midway Atoll, and about 40% of the bird fledglings hatch on this beach area will die of starvation. That's because they feed on this plastic instead of what is natural food for them, and it fills their stomach, they feel that they're full, and they don't eat anything else, and then they starve. So, about 1.4 billion pounds of trash is making its way into the ocean each year. It's currently estimated that there's about 7 million tons of garbage floating around in the ocean that can extend to a depth of about 33 feet. Volunteers across the globe are collecting trash and sharing what they found in a day each fall. The organizer of this event is the Ocean Conservancy, and their annual International Coastal Cleanup is what they're doing. The graphic on the right side of your slide depicts what they have found during this annual cleanup. So the top 10 items that they're finding in the ocean is cigarette filters and cigarettes, food wrappers and containers, beverage bottles that are plastic, plastic bags, the caps and lids to plastic bottles, plastic forks, cups, plates, knives, and spoons, straws and stirrers, beverage bottles that are glass, beverage cans, and then bags. So these are the top 10 items found. Now some of this could be material that's on the beach as well as material that's floating in the ocean. Obviously paper bags aren't going to make it long in the ocean itself, but they could have been present along the beaches that were being cleaned up. I've also provided a picture of this bird. In the areas where the beaches are being impacted by having so much plastic accumulated, the birds are unintentionally feeding their chicks plastic. In addition, the Laysan albatross, when it's hunting for food, it will swoop down and catch fish by skimming the water's surface, unknowingly picking up bits of plastic. The plastic makes the birds feel full, and then they end up starving to death. And as you can see in this situation, there's numerous pieces of plastic in the digestive tract of this bird. So, solutions. Well, currently, the plastic that we rely on doesn't biodegrade. In fact, a plastic grocery bag takes about 1,000 years to decompose. So one solution is create a biodegradable plastic. Bioplastics are durable substances made from renewable cellulose. Researchers at Harvard are trying to develop a new bioplastic made from shrimp shells. This is an organic material known as chitosan, which is a form of chitin, and once discarded, the material can break down in the ocean in a few weeks. Again, normal plastic can take over 1,000 years to break down. The other option is microbe-eating plastic. Certain bacteria can eat plastic garbage that is thrown into the ocean. A researcher named Trary Mincer and his colleagues looked at parts of a fishing line, a plastic bag, and a plastic nurdle from the Sargasso Sea in the northern Atlantic. The area has more than 1,100 tons of plastic floating around. They've used a scanning electron microscopy, and they found bacteria eating away at the plastic surface. This is the first documented case of microbes chewing on plastic. Genetic analysis showed that about 25% of the bacteria on the polyethylene surface were Vibrios, which are bacteria from the cholera line of bacteria. So it's an option that we could look into. In addition, one of the best approaches is let's use less plastic for our containers for eating and drinking, and maybe use glass instead. Something definitely needs to be done. According to the United Nations Environmental Program, plastic is killing 1 million seabirds a year and 100,000 marine mammals and turtles a year. It's killing sea animals by choking their throats and gullets and clogging up their digestive tracts, which is leading to fatal constipation and eventual starvation. So here's a picture of a turtle that's caught in a plastic 6-pack ring, and Obviously, it's got deformities resulting from that. And then here's a picture of turtles and manta rays swimming amidst all the plastic. And, this looks like jellyfish or food to them. And as a result, they eat it, and then it causes them to be full, or it blocks their digestive tract and it kills them. So we just talked about the Pacific Garbage Patch, and anything that enters the ocean is primarily coming from the land area and our streams and rivers that feed into the ocean. So I'd like to focus on the Mississippi River Basin for a little bit. This is a map of the Mississippi River watershed, and it incorporates the Mississippi River as the main stem, the Missouri River, the Ohio River, and it covers over 50% of the United States. So whatever land use is occurring within this region, it's going to impact the quality of the water in these streams and rivers. And eventually the loading of materials into these streams and rivers are going to reach the Gulf of Mexico. So what we're finding is that there is a large oxygen depletion zone in the Gulf of Mexico right where the Mississippi River discharges into the ocean. It forms every year during the spring and summer as a result of oxygen depleting algal blooms. So the main cause of this is huge inputs of nitrate plant nutrients from farms, cities, factories, and sewage treatment plants in the vast Mississippi River Basin. The Gulf of Mexico dead zone is one of 61 oxygen-depleted zones that form in our coastal waters along our coastlines because of excessive non-point inputs of fertilizer and animal waste from land runoff, as well as the deposition of nitrogen compounds from the atmosphere. Again, the biggest zone in the U.S. is in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's considered to be the third largest dead zone in the world. So only a few fish species can survive in water with less than 4 parts per million of dissolved oxygen content. So this graphic just shows you that good dissolved oxygen should remain about 8 to 9 parts per million. And if it's around 4.5 to 6.7, we would consider that water body to be moderately polluted. So this is a map depicting various locations of dead zones throughout the world that occur seasonally. Please understand that the dead zones are created in the spring when the sun heats up the freshwater runoff and then creates a barrier layer, cutting off the saltier water below from contact with oxygen. Also, we have the situation where the nitrogen loading and phosphorus loading creates huge algae blooms in the spring and summer, and when the algae dies, it sinks to the bottom and decomposes and then uses up the oxygen in the deeper water near the coastlines. So this is a seasonal effect. Winter does bring a break from this, but spring runoff begins another cycle. So again, here's locations of dead zones around the world, and I already mentioned that the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is considered to be the third largest dead zone in the world. And here's an indication of the dead zone areas. The reds and yellows have dissolved oxygen content too low for anything to live in that area. What ends up happening is the fish either stay away from the area, or if the shift in oxygen content happens abruptly, they die in great numbers and a fish kill occurs. Tiny organisms also die as well. Here's an example of farm runoff that contributes to the problem. Here's an example of a fish kill that is evidence of a dead zone scenario with low dissolved oxygen content. And then this is an example of an algae bloom that's occurring along a coastline. Now this is a map depicting the watershed for the Chesapeake Bay region, and the watershed extends into Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. It depicts areas where there's no oxygen in blue and low concentration of oxygen in orange, and this shifts seasonally each year. This is the largest estuary in the U.S. that is severely degraded as a result of water pollution from point and non-point sources, as well as air pollution, and it has a large dead zone that occurs as a result of that. There's been much improvement in the watershed to try to limit runoff that's impacting the Chesapeake Bay, but we still have more work to do.